Hello, brothers and sisters. Our readings this week are just too good. So I ended up making two videos. This video is about the gospel, and the other video is about the first reading. So, the chapter before our gospel for this upcoming Sunday, Jesus reveals that he is the Messiah, and he says that the Messiah has to suffer and die. And Peter is no fan of that. He says, Jesus, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. Then we come to our gospel for this week, the Transfiguration, where Jesus, James, John, and Peter, they go up a mountain. Jesus starts shining really brightly. Elijah and Moses appear and talk with him. Then the cloud comes and says, this is my beloved son, listen to him. And Peter's a big fan of this. He says, let's keep on doing this. I'll build some tents. We can hang out here forever. But once again, Peter's disappointed. Jesus stops glowing. Moses and Elijah, they both disappear, and they go down from the mountain. And so, previous chapter, Peter's disappointed because Christ says he has to suffer. And then, in this passage, Peter's disappointed because Jesus stops being transfigured. His glory fades. And so in both cases, Peter, he's not a fan of suffering, but he's a big fan of glorification. And so what Peter doesn't get, and he doesn't get it because he hasn't seen the cross and the resurrection yet, he doesn't understand how closely these two things are united. No cross, no resurrection. No suffering, no glorification. And conversely, no glorification, the suffering doesn't make any sense. No resurrection, the cross is meaningless. So that's one thing that our gospel proclaims today. It proclaims this close unity between Christ's suffering and his glorification. Now, the transfigured Jesus, he interacts with two figures, Moses and Elijah. Moses, he is the lawgiver. Through him, God tells the Israelites how to live in right relationship with God. And Moses, he presides over the Sinai covenant, where for the first time, God establishes a covenant between him and an entire nation. Not just one family, but an entire nation is in relationship with God. And now there's a bunch of similarities between the Transfiguration and the Sinai covenant. Right? So Moses, he goes up a mountain. And when he goes up a mountain, a cloud comes down and covers him. And God speaks from the cloud. And the Israelites are terrified. And one of the things that Moses learns in this interaction with God is how to set up the meeting tent where he will interact with God in the future. And then this transfiguration event ends with Moses disappearing. Moses is gone, and only Jesus remains. Jesus is the one who ultimately fulfills the law, and he shows us how to live in relationship with God. The other figure is Elijah. Elijah, the prophet, right? So the Israelites, they had the law, but over time, their hearts grew cold, and they weren't fulfilling the law. And so the prophets were people who came and told them, live up to the law, be faithful to God, and he will be faithful with you. And there are generations of prophets, and over again, the prophets, they saw that the people of God fell short. A hero would arise, a new king, and there would be hope, but then they would be corrupted by sin, and they would fall short of observing God's commandments. And so over time, the prophets, they developed this hope and this understanding that the only way for humans to live in right relationship with God, the only way for humans to be on equal footing with God would be for God to intervene and to put an end to the broken condition of the world. They had a hope, a desire for the apocalypse, the end of the world with all its sin and sickness and evil. Now, a particular idea associated with this apocalyptic end of the world was a dream that the prophet Daniel had. So he had this dream of one like the Son of Man who rides on the clouds into the heavenly throne room. And so God, he has destroyed evil, And in this throne room, everyone is clothed with clothing that's super bright. And there's a terrible fear upon Daniel for being in this heavenly throne room. And the Son of Man, he takes his seat at the right hand of God, and he rules over the world, passing judgment. And at the end of our scriptures today, end of the gospel, Jesus says, don't tell anyone about this until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. Here, through Elijah, Jesus is claiming himself to be this apocalyptic figure, this Son of Man who's going to rule over the world, vanquish the powers of evil, and usher in a new age, an age free from evil. Now, I mentioned earlier how the Transfiguration immediately follows after the prediction of the Passion, but it's also intimately connected to Gethsemane, right? So in both at the Transfiguration and in Gethsemane, Peter, James, and John go with Jesus up a mountain. Here in the Transfiguration, God calls Jesus his beloved Son. And then at Gethsemane, Jesus cries out, Abba, Father. In both cases, Peter, he plays an important role talking to Jesus, interacting with people. And in both cases, there's a lack of comprehension on behalf of the disciples. They don't get it. And so Jesus, he is this apocalyptic figure who has come into the world to destroy evil and make a new age. And how does he do that? He does that through suffering. You know, he does this great, incredible thing through the cross. The cross and the resurrection. Great things in suffering. They're inseparable from each other in Christianity. And so we can ask ourselves, you know, which of these realities do we have a greater affinity for? You know, do we feel closer to Christ when we're suffering, when things aren't going our way? Or do we feel really close to Christ when things are going great, when we're on top of the world? You know, thinking about which one we have greater affinity for, we can then think, you know, how can we undergo conversion so that when we suffer, we can be with Christ, and that when we rejoice, we can be with Christ.